Hey guys, quick announcement before the start of the video. In case you hadn't seen yet, I'm planning on streaming for the first time very soon. I put up a poll earlier this week to see which platform my viewers would prefer I stream on, and it's pretty even between YouTube and Twitch. Since the poll is so even, I'm not sure which platform I'll be streaming on first, so if you want to tune in, you can follow my Twitch now at twitch.tv/jittersval. I'll leave a link in the description. Even if I don't stream on Twitch next week, I still plan on using it, probably alternating between Twitch and YouTube every weekend. I plan to stream for the first time next Saturday, August the 21st, probably around 1 p.m, so if you're interested, come check it out. Anyways, that's all. Now let's get into the video. Hello, my name is Jitters and welcome back to another episode of Why Everybody Plays, a series of mine where I talk about the most picked agents in the game. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about Killjoy. Killjoy is one of the 3 sentinels in the game. Generally, a team will have 1, but especially in solo queue, I find that it's not uncommon for a team to have 2. Either a Cypher or a Killjoy is the main sentinel, and then a Sage usually as a sort of support. In pro play, I feel like I see Killjoy and Cypher kind of equally, with the sentinel of choice is usually dependent on the map. For example, Cypher is more common on a map like Haven, and Killjoy is usually the sentinel of choice on Ascent. But in solo queue, depending on your rank, it feels like Killjoy is kind of phased Cypher out, to the point where if my team does have a sentinel, it's usually Killjoy. So I wanted to kind of explore why I think Killjoy is picked so often. Of course, as with all these episodes, I always start by talking about the agent's weaknesses. For Killjoy, I have 3 main ones I wanted to talk about. The first one is that as a sentinel, she's generally harder to play than something like a duelist. I've seen some videos talk about not needing as good of aim to play a sentinel, and I totally disagree with that. If you're in a 1v1, you need to be able to play off your util properly, and it's way easier to do that with an agent that has a flash. When you're a duelist in a 1v1, you have util designed to make that fight easier. A Phoenix or Reyna can just throw out a flash and then peek and have such a huge advantage in a gunfight, where sentinels don't really have that luxury. Their util is more about info gathering and playing off that information. With Killjoy, you can throw out a turret, and if it shoots at an enemy, you now know where an enemy is and can peek off of it, but you still need the mechanics to be able to hit that shot to confirm that kill. A really good Killjoy is able to peek off of it well enough to get an advantage in that 1v1, since the enemy's recoil and crosshair placement will be messed up from shooting your turret, but that still requires more practice than just throwing out a flash. It's also way harder to retake a site as a sentinel compared to a duelist. In a 1v2 situation where the enemy's just planted the bomb, the last agent I would want to be is a sentinel. With Killjoy, you generally have a setup for one of your sites. If they didn't attack your site at all, which is probably every single round, let's be honest, you can recall your turret and alarm bot, and hopefully you only put down 1 molly. So at most, you're going into a site retake with a turret, an alarm bot, and a molly, assuming no ults. Compare that to a Reyna who will have 2 flashes and can invis after getting 1 of the kills, or a Jett that can smoke angles off and dash away if she needs to. It's pretty much night and day. Another big weakness of Killjoy is the range of her abilities. Now, don't get me wrong, I think it's very good that they added this into the game. For those of you who don't know, Killjoy has a max range where her util will turn off if she leaves this range. But there was a time where this wasn't the case. Killjoy could play on the opposite side of the map of her util and it would still watch that site for her. It was very strong and I'm happy for the nerf, but this creates a weakness that teams are able to exploit. First of all, having a max range on her abilities forces Killjoy to play within that range. This means that when Killjoy wants to rotate to a different site, there's now a trade-off and decisions that have to be made. Now if she rotates, it'll create an opening for enemies to push through her util, flank, or even take her site. She also has to think about whether or not she wants to recall her util, because if she doesn't, it'll be useless on the other site, but if she wants to rotate back, she won't have her util set up where she wants it. Another problem with her util having range is that she now tells on herself. If an enemy walks onto a site and Killjoy's util is off, they now know that Killjoy has left the site and can relay that information to their team. Or if the util is on, the enemies know that there's a Killjoy somewhere and that they need to make sure to clear the site properly. Compare that to Cypher. If he leaves the site, his trips will stay up no matter how far away he gets from them. This means that an agent like Cypher doesn't have the same trade-offs as Killjoy, and he can rotate more confidently knowing his setup will still give him information on the opposite site. Of course, sentinels are usually anchoring a site, so this isn't as big of an issue, since usually when a sentinel does rotate, they don't really expect to have to go back in most situations. The last weakness I wanted to talk about is that Killjoy isn't strong on every map. This has only really become an issue in the 2 newest maps, Icebox and Breeze. Her util just isn't very strong on those maps in my opinion, since they're so large and make it hard for a Killjoy to hold down a site. On both of these maps, there isn't really a great way to set up your util. Plus, there are so many better options on these maps that it's hard to justify picking a sentinel like Killjoy or Cypher. And that's all the weaknesses I wanted to talk about. There aren't that many in my opinion, and if you really understand how to play her, you can minimize them pretty well. And with that being said, it's time to start talking about Killjoy's strengths. The first one is pretty obvious and is that she's one of the strongest agents on defense in the game. It's really hard to push a good Killjoy. You'll have an easier time getting into Area 51 than taking a site that Killjoy is holding. Hard pushing one will almost definitely make your team lose the round. Her mollies will split your team off and deal a lot of damage, especially when combined with her alarm bot. She can play across with her turret to get a free kill on you while you try to shoot it. And her ult is really strong for retaking a site. Her util allows her to get a ton of information and watch large areas without her having to peek and put herself in danger. For example, on Ascent, probably her best map, she can put a turret on top of the boxes on A, and it'll detect if any enemies have walked through A main or tree, which allows a teammate to rotate to help the other site if they need to, while also watching to see if an enemy crosses. She can also use her util to watch entire areas to make it easier to stack a site if your team is struggling on defense. For example, on Ascent again, she can put an alarm bot mid and her turret on B, and then her team can stack A. Or on Haven, you can just put an alarm bot B and then play Garage and then have your team either stack C or A. Having a Killjoy on your team will make your defense much easier. My second point is that Killjoy is also very strong in a post-plant situation. After your team takes a site and gets the bomb down, she can then use her util to help lock down that site. She can put her alarm bot and 2 mollies on the bomb to stall the defuse long enough to win a round sometimes. And if she can't get off of site, she can use her util to make it hard for enemies to push through certain choke points and give your team information on where they're retaking from. The thing that a lot of players don't realize is that post-plant on offense is played pretty much like a defense. So having a Killjoy help lock down the site after you've planted is going to make it a lot easier for your team to secure rounds where you're able to get the bomb down. Another big strength of Killjoys is that when you have one, you don't really need to worry about watching flanks. When attacking, there are a lot of times where a teammate dies to an enemy that pushes and flanks from the opposite site. This is because solo queue teams don't always designate a player to watch flanks, and this has probably cost you some rounds. When playing an agent like Killjoy, you no longer need a player holding the flank. You can just place down her turret and you don't have to worry about it anymore. This is something that for some reason a lot of lower elo Killjoys don't do, and I just don't get it. The turret is free and can and will save you a lot of rounds that you might have lost to a flank that no one on your team was thinking about. This is also another reason why Killjoy is actually a strong lurker. Her util isn't really that important for executing on a site, and her turret allows her to play on the other side of the map without having to worry about getting killed from behind. A good example of this is on Split. You can throw her turret in Garage and it'll make sure that no enemies have pushed into it. And then you can play mid, make a presence, delay rotations, relay information to your team, and then get back to your team when they start executing and then play post plant. I'm telling you right now, I'd rather have Killjoy's turret watching my flank over any solo queue teammate I've ever played with. The next point I wanted to talk about is that Killjoy has a very strong ultimate. Killjoy ult is one of the stronger ultimates in the game. It covers a huge area and forces players to leave that area or basically become a free kill. I found that it's strongest during site executes to clear a site, on site retakes, and sometimes on post plants to stall. This ult is one that you can make a game plan around. If you're playing on Ascent, you can ult in Garage, kill anyone trying to rotate off a site in the last few seconds, and then get bombed down, all for basically free. The biggest negative of her ult is that it can be destroyed. But depending on the site you decide to push, that isn't always an issue. It really depends on who's playing that site and who has a molly, or if there's a Sova with shock dart lineups. If there is, nothing will tilt you more, trust me. And if the enemy uses something like a Brim or Sova ult to take out the Killjoy lockdown, that trade is kind of worth it. Those ults can be round winning, and trading them for a Killjoy lockdown isn't always the worst thing. The final point I wanted to make is that Killjoy is easier to play than Cypher. This is really important because, as I mentioned before, teams usually run at least one sentinel, and in a solo queue game, since players don't really see Sage as a sentinel, there are really only 2 options. So it's no surprise that most players gravitate towards the easier of the 2. It's just a lot easier to get value out of Killjoy than it is from Cypher. Killjoy's turret and mollies get free chip damage to kill enemies easier. Her alarm bot gives you double damage, also making it easier to confirm kills. And again, her ult is pretty easy to understand too. With Cypher, it requires you to be really good at playing off the information you can get for yourself. His camera can ping someone to be seen through walls, but you can't swing off of it like you can with a Killjoy turret. His trips are very strong for getting you free kills if an enemy gets caught in it, but you need to be able to switch your setup all the time because enemies aren't really going to fall for your trips multiple times in a game. And honestly, at this point, a lot of players know most of the possible Cypher trips, so a lot of the time they just get destroyed. So all you get out of them is that you know an enemy is near where your trip was. His cages are also not always easy to use for a lot of players. They require players to have a good understanding of the timing of when to activate them to get the most value, which requires way more game sense than just putting down an alarm bot and peeking off of it when it activates. Because of all this, I think that most players that try out Sentinels will have a way easier time with Killjoy than they would with Cypher. So a lot of them end up gravitating towards her, which is why everybody plays Killjoy. So that's all for this episode of Why Everybody Plays. Please leave a comment letting me know if you agree or disagree with any of my points. And if you did, please leave a like on this video and subscribe for more Valorant related content.